We don't call muscle cells. We call them muscle fibers. And this is explained in the next slide, so just trust me. Embedded within one of your skeletal muscles, like, I don't know, say the biceps brachii, are thousands of these individual muscle fibers. And within each individual muscle fiber are tons of proteins that are called myofibrils. Also, take a look. Muscle fibers and myofibrils look pretty similar, so it's easy to get them confused. About 80% of a muscle fiber are these cylinder-shaped proteins called myofibrils. The other 20% is taken up by very few organelles, most of which are designed to contribute to making a contraction. There are tons of mitochondria in a muscle fiber because all we're doing in muscle fibers are using ATP to make contractions. In fact, you never stop making contractions. In the background, all of your muscles are maintaining a very low level contraction that you're pretty much unaware of. If you haven't watched the muscle wrappings mini lecture, I suggest that you do that first. In one sentence, it explains that every muscle fiber is attached to the endomysium, which is attached to the paramecium surrounding the muscle fascicles, which is then attached to the epimysium, which surrounds the entire muscle, and then fades into tendons or epimyoses that connect the muscle to the bone and the skeleton. That was a long sentence, but it sums up that mini lecture. If we were able to shorten the myofibrils, right, if I was able to get a myofibril to shorten itself, then it would actually shorten each individual muscle fiber, which then would shorten all of the muscle fascicles, which then would shorten the entire skeletal muscle that would pull one part toward the other as your muscle lifts one bone toward the other. When your muscles are forming in utero, there are stem cells generating two different types of cells. And you can see these two populations here. One's in a peach type color, which will morph into a muscle fiber, and the other one's in like a yellowish color. The peachy cells up here are called myoblasts. Oh, sorry, let's do this. Myoblasts. And these are precursor muscle cells. What happens is that the myoblasts fuse together to create one muscle fiber. And it also accounts for the fact of why we call it a fiber and not a cell. Muscle fibers are usually incapable of doing mitosis unless there's a mutation that causes that to happen. However, you can change the size of your muscle fibers, and you can increase the number of myofiber proteins in a muscle fiber. If you've ever damaged your muscle and actually do need a muscle fiber mitosis, it'll occur by copying that other population of cells, which are called myosatellite cells. They're kind of like housekeeping cells. They're like, oh, hey, you don't want to do that? I'll do that for you. These myosatellite cells will tap into the instructions of the nucleus to do mitosis and other functions that the muscle fiber just doesn't want to do. Muscle fibers themselves, they don't tap into the nucleus to do mitosis. Myofibrils are the most abundant protein contained in a muscle fiber. As we go through these mini lectures, you will start to confuse the cylinder-shaped muscle fibers with the cylinder-shaped myofibrils. Before you even look at a cylinder-shaped structure in this chapter, you should ask yourself, am I looking at a myofibril or am I looking at a muscle fiber? There is another mini lecture, of course, that explains more details about the structure of a myofibril. But you can see here on this myofibril that there are these repeating stripes of dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light. These repeating stripes of dark and light bands. And this is what creates what are called striations that you can see running in this orientation up here in the picture, microscopic picture of a muscle. In fact, this very faint purple line right here is the sarcolemma, and striations will always run perpendicular, making a 90-degree angle with the sarcolemma. Okay, let's consider that we have a muscle cell and a specific name, the muscle fiber, and we'll also give the cell membrane a specific name, the sarcolemma. As we learn from learning about osteons, the suffix lemma means sheet. For muscle, we can use the prefixes myo, meso, and sarco. The sarcolemma, it's not just a sheet that covers a muscle fiber. There are tubes piercing through this sheet, and those tubes run completely through the muscle fiber's interior, connecting parts of the sarcolemma. And these tubes are these light blue here on this picture, the light blue. The darker blue is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Basically, these tubes, which are also called T-tubules or transverse tubules, they increase the surface area of the sarcolemma. And as we know, structures displayed longitudinally can look very different from structures when they are cut in a transverse section. So I want you to take a look at the very right edge of this muscle fiber to see where this web-like structure is. It's kind of like a honeycomb structure. And what it's doing is it is actually wrapping around each individual myofibril. So these tubes that are piercing into the muscle then fan out into this honeycomb network. The need for this increased surface area comes from the fact that muscle fibers don't act on their own. They are controlled by action potentials, electricity, or thoughts from your brain. So if an action potential leaves your brain, let's draw your brain. Here's your brain. Here's the little brain. Here's your spinal cord. If an action potential starts up here, leaves your brain, comes down your spinal cord, comes out and over and touches a muscle fiber through a neuron, that muscle fiber will then contract upon direction from the muscle. We need this action potential or electricity moved from the nerve to the muscle, but we also want it to quickly spread through the muscle. I don't want it to spread out from here going wah, wah, wah. I want it to spread out through the muscle in all directions, all directions. And that's what these T-tubules do. They increase the surface area that an action potential can cover when it finally comes and hits the muscle fiber.